Thresh occupies something of a unique place in my mind. I used him on occasion, but he was never one of my mains back when I still played League, and I can't say I'd have ever ranked him as one of my favorite characters. However, I remember vividly that Thresh was the first new champion I ever saw released. He came out like a week after I initially started playing the game, and I hadn't seen any promotional material or talk about him beforehand. So, when I booted up League and saw that the login screen was suddenly this spooky ghost man and the theme was this ominous nursery rhyme, I was surprised to say the least. Now, Thresh isn't exactly the first horror-themed champion to be added to League, but the others before him all had a level of cartoonishness to them that sort of held them back. Some of them are still suffering from that to this day, but Thresh went full-on horror mode. An intimidating design, a menacing presence, and a concept that would rightly terrify anyone. A monster that could inflict eternal suffering upon you, even after you perished by his hand. Thresh's lore has been retconned a number of times over the years, much like many other characters in the game, but the premise of his character has always been the same. He's an undead warden who stalks you, steals your soul, and traps it in a lantern so that he can torture you for all eternity. His original bio didn't really expand on that much. In life, he was the warden of an unknown prison somewhere on Runeterra that supposedly housed the worst criminals the world had to offer, unless you were a champion in the League of Legends. Thresh delighted in tormenting his inmates in just about every way he could think of. But eventually, a prison break led to Thresh's demise. Or so everyone thought. Thresh's soul made its way to the Shadow Isles, which at the time were implied to actually be some sort of gateway between the living world and the world of the dead. Not a natural gateway, mind you. The Isles were always the work of the Ruined King, even in the old story. But that lore gave us vague implications that the ritual he used tore open the boundary, and that is what created the land of undeath we know today. I mean, it used to be Yorick's job to guide souls through the Shadow Isles so that they could actually reach the afterlife. But not all souls followed him to the end. Those who got lost or wandered off turned into wraiths, trapped within the black mist, and Thresh was one such wraith. Now unshackled from the limits of mortality, Thresh would stalk the living world, tormenting whoever he pleased before dragging them back to the Isles in his lantern for an eternity of anguish. He was conceived as a horror movie monster, effectively, even describing himself as the thing under the bed in one of his voice lines. Then the Great Retcon happened, and, of course, Thresh's lore got updated to reflect that. While it did expand greatly on the character's history, I would argue that it did so poorly. In truth, Thresh's second bio is partially the reason why I started doing Runeterra rewrites in the first place. Before I even considered doing a series of rewriting Champions lore states, I wrote my first draft of Thresh's rewrite shortly after his second bio came out, entirely out of spite, if I'm being completely honest. It differs somewhat from the version that I actually posted on this channel, but suffice it to say, I did not care for what they did to him. So, how did they change Thresh's lore, and why did it initially anger me so much? Let's take a look. In Thresh's initial rewrite, he was moved from some unnamed prison to being a warden on the Blessed Isles, the precursors to the Shadow Isles. Rather than being a warden who guarded actual prisoners, Thresh was in charge of protecting a vault full of living relics. The magic of these relics slowly turned him evil, for whatever reason, and so he started torturing them. He'd take a living spell book and read an incantation partway through, only to stop and close the book. He'd scratch the glass of a mirror that had a man's soul inside of it, polish it, then do it all over again. Already, I think you might be able to see the issue. While the original bio never got too explicit with Thresh's torments, it describes him breaking the minds and bodies of his charges through a variety of grisly torments, often using chains as his favorite instrument. Now we have him performing acts of, let's be honest, mild mischief on these living relics that are never really explained. Seriously, why is there a man stuck in a mirror? How did the book come to life? Is it from Bandle or something? The answers are never given, but what I do know is that none of this sounds nearly as terrifying as being flayed by metal chains. Eventually, though, Thresh would get a human prisoner, a man who had the ability to regenerate his flesh no matter how severely he was hurt. Who was this guy? Why did he need to be locked up? Why lock him in a vault full of magical artifacts instead of, an actual prison cell? Again, we're not meant to think about it too hard. What matters is that Thresh now had a human he could torture indefinitely in addition to all the living relics. It feels like they knew that Thresh wasn't nearly as scary when he was just torturing random objects rather than people. So they tried to rectify this by giving him a single actual prisoner, but it just did not work at all. On top of all of that, even when the order he belonged to suspected that Thresh might be up to something nefarious, no one investigated him. Why? Because, I kid you not, he was too creepy. The other monks wanted nothing to do with Thresh because they were afraid of him, even though no one had ever actually seen him doing anything. Like, imagine people in your neighborhood start disappearing without a trace, and you don't bother to investigate your number one suspect because you're too creeped out by his demeanor. That was the attitude the monks took toward Thresh when the members of their order began to mysteriously vanish without a trace. Anyways, then the ruination happened and Thresh became a wraith. What, do you think I'm skipping over something? Well, I'm not. In this version of the bio, that's literally how things play out. Viego shows up, causes the ruination, the magic washes over Thresh in his vault, and now he's undead. Oh, and he can also trap souls in his lantern now, for whatever reason. Yeah, this version of the bio was a mess. So much was left unexplained, Thresh was made out to be more mischievous than genuinely evil, and his sadism, the defining trait of his character, was the result of being affected by magic rather than just being naturally cruel. This interpretation of him just felt like such a huge fundamental misstep and misunderstanding of what made Thresh intimidating to begin with. Personal ranting and bias aside, though, that version of the lore is, thankfully, no longer canon. The current iteration of Thresh's backstory keeps many of the same notes, but they removed some more of the, dubious aspects. Now, Thresh was the guardian of a vault filled with dangerous relics, but none of them are stated to be alive, and we don't get anything about him trying to torture them. Furthermore, Thresh's attitude is now the exact reason why he was given such a role. The sole guardian of a creepy vault hidden in the darkest depths of Helia. It was dressed up as a prestigious position, but it was effectively just to keep Thresh at an arm's length from the rest of the Order, denying him the chance to make any sort of name for himself. It's for this reason that when Viego came, Thresh willingly betrayed the Order he served to lead the Mad King to the waters of life. From there, the ruination happened because of this betrayal, turning Thresh into an undead monster that stalks the world for powerful souls to capture and break. It's still weird that an otherwise apparently normal lantern now has the power to trap souls inside of it, but hey, it's definitely an improvement. What I like about this iteration of Thresh's bio is that it adds a little extra depth to his character. Thresh is and always has been defined by his sadistic tendencies above all else, though he's never really been given much of a satisfying reason for them. Now, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the portrayal of a Thresh who's evil for evil's sake. He's never had any grand purpose or justification for his actions, and I think that's always been a part of his charm as a character. There is a certain appeal to villains who are just unapologetically awful and revel in it. This lore hasn't changed that about Thresh, but it has given us a reason for all his cruelty, namely that he's spiteful, petty, and jealous of others' success. Thresh in his current lore was shunned by his order, but never outright banished. They stuffed him away in a dark corner because they didn't want to deal with him any more than necessary, and that caused whatever dark tendencies Thresh had deep down to grow and fester. He became bitter and resentful of his peers, and that's what led him to betray the order. He revels in tormenting people because it gives him power over others, and that's probably why he favors trying to break stronger wills over weaker ones. It's an interesting direction, and while it is a slight shame that he no longer has a habit of torturing people before becoming a wraith, I guess they just couldn't find a way to make that work when he was moved from a random prison to the Blessed Isles. While I don't think it's perfect, nor is it the direction I would have gone if you'd watched my Thresh rewrite, I do think that it fits where Riot has been trying to take the character. See, Thresh has become something of a mascot for the Shadow Isles, more so than the Ruined King himself even. Part of that is due to his character, though I imagine his relevance in pro play might also be a factor. In either case, Thresh is now a much bigger part of the ruination, even indirectly causing it by aiding Viego. In fact, Riot has been making clear and obvious pushes over the years to effectively make Thresh the true antagonist of the Shadow Isles. He is the rival of Lucian and Senna, who are devoted to fighting the Isles, after all. He is also basically the reason that Viego got free from his age-long slumber, and after the Sentinels of Light event, Thresh has now officially become Lord of the Shadow Isles. He's manipulated heroes and villains alike, also that Thresh can ultimately seize power for himself. While Viego may have been the main villain of the entire Shadow Isles plotline, Thresh was the true threat lurking in the darkness the entire time. In theory, I actually don't mind this. While it might not have been the original intent of his character, I think Thresh fits the role of cunning manipulator perfectly. The main issue is with its execution. I don't think I need to remind anyone of how absolutely awful Rise of the Sentinels was. For one thing, Thresh becomes obsessed with regaining his humanity, for whatever reason, despite reveling in the fact that he's a monster. I do get that being bound to the Black Mist means that he can't leave the Isles for long unless a harrowing happens, but let's face it, we all know the part about him regaining his human form was just because Riot saw how marketable Thresh was the last time they gave him a skin with, well, skin. Yeah, alright, let's address it. Unbound Thresh is a thing, and it's bleh. At the very least, his trailer implies that he still looks monstrous underneath, and can just opt to make himself seem more human at a whim for deceiving his victims, but it still took one of the most iconic monster designs in the game, and made it hot for no particular reason other than marketability. Unfortunately, it's what we have now, and it'll be the status quo for Thresh going forward. On that note, what exactly is Thresh doing in the current lore? Well, I called him the new Lord of the Isles earlier, but it doesn't seem like Thresh is really interested in ruling over them. He's mostly just doing what he always has, roaming around stealing souls to torment. The only difference is that now Thresh can do it all year round, without having to worry about the confines of the Black Mist. So, like most of Rise of the Sentinels, hardly anything at all has changed, and we'll have to wait for the next time Riot feels brave enough to touch upon the storyline again to see if Senna or Lucian plan to actually do anything about Thresh. So that's where Thresh's story has placed him for the foreseeable future. It's unfortunate, but I think the biggest shame here is that, as usual, Riot didn't take the opportunity to explore the logical extreme of their own ideas. Honestly, ever since that first rewrite of his bio, I have been preaching one idea again and again. That Thresh should have been the true cause of the ruination. I mean, think about it. Thresh was the guardian of a vault filled with magical, dangerous artifacts. He has a magical lantern that can imprison souls for seemingly no real reason, and Thresh resides in a cursed mist that turns just about everything it touches undead. The setup here is perfect for a Pandora's box situation. Perhaps the lantern was initially meant to contain some sort of evil power. Maybe it could be the evils of the human heart, like in my rewrite, or maybe it could have been some sort of ancient, vile entity. Hell, Legends of Runeterra places Nocturne on the Shadow Isles, so maybe you could have just made Nocturne the true source of the Black Mist? Just throwing out ideas here. Either way, the obvious direction to go here is that Thresh wants to open the lantern, but for some reason can't. At least not until Viego shows up. Perhaps it's just an opportunity, or maybe Camivor's king is the only one who can open it, for whatever reason. The point is that if you're so intent on making Thresh the true villain of the Isles, to the point that he even directly helped bring about the ruination, then why not take the obvious route and give him a more direct tie to the Black Mist? Perhaps, rather than a magical pool of water, Thresh convinces Viego that the power stored within the lantern can revive a soul. And so the Mad King opens it, unwittingly becoming a vessel for the darkness within. It would make a lot more sense, in my opinion, than the harrowing just being the result of, 3 different kinds of magic all interacting in this very weird and specific manner. There are a lot of ways you could have gone about it, and Riot was so close to hitting the mark with Thresh after his second rewrite, but fell just short of greatness. And now Thresh is just another monster stalking Runeterra. Hell, Fiddlesticks has kind of taken his spotlight in that regard. So, what's next for the Chain Warden? Time will tell, I suppose. But what do you all think? Do you like Thresh as the secret mastermind behind everything, or would you have taken a different direction? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you all next time.